Here she is. Hi.
Good to see you.
Oh, good to see you.
Maybe you and Vince together on that mic would be good.
Okay.
If you put it right between you, and you have to be pretty close up on it.
Okay.
They're good mics, but you have to be like this close.
Okay.
So it's one of those. So
Okay.
you can just sort of keep leaning in.
All right.
And I will set up this.
Is this yours?
No, I think that's Andrew. You can just
Oh.
send it
Move
down.
him one down.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
You know each other well enough, you can buddy up.
Yeah. Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. All right. So, does this get videotaped?
There we go. Seat right there. This is Lansing Online News Radio. You're listening to LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan, with Bonnie Buckaroo and Bill Castaneer. And this evening, we're going to be devoting the bulk of our time to a discussion about the case here in Lansing that's caused quite a bit of comment. Cosgar Lato has been charged. He falsely confessed to murder here in the Lansing area, and there's quite a controversy about that. But before we get into that, I want to get in a few announcements with my friend Bill Castaneer here. He had brought in an article tonight that shows some news on the stadium down in Detroit. The Ilitch family is, so shall we say, doing well as a result of some of the deals that have happened with the stadium down in Detroit.
This is pretty typical of stadiums wherever they're built. They're terribly subsidized by local communities and state monies, typically. There's been tons of research on this that shows that the repayment just never comes. I mean, they may pay off the debt, but the investment, what's the return on investment? It seldom is what it says it's going to be.
Especially for a city like Detroit that is under an emergency manager, such dire financial straits. The idea that, well, what are we looking at in a bill total here? About 150 bill?
150 million.
Yeah.
12.8 million will come out of schools. Now it's going to be repaid by the state. So that means that someone's on the hook somewhere. That's the basic bottom line for this. And the articles that are coming out of Detroit are Ilitch is a billionaire.
Right. What, more than $3 billion in family wealth, is that right?
Right, exactly.
So you keep wondering why it is that citizens need to subsidize things like this for billionaire play toys.
Hard to have an answer for that.
Hard to have an answer for that.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's one of those.
Especially in a city that is just not making it.
Yeah, and I think when we're seeing, I mean, we're in the middle of a fragile economy and the world situation isn't very stable right now. It kind of makes you wonder where your real priorities are.
I don't know if you happen to see, Time Magazine had an article about Detroit last week because it's suffering its worst winter in 130 years.
Yeah.
And when they transferred that to video, they showed the streets and how absolutely impossible they are to drive down. I was down one just recently. It's unbelievable.
We're watching it turn into a third world city. And really, the kind of infrastructure. I mean, one of the challenges with this kind of weather is the beating that the infrastructure takes. We're seeing things in the state of Washington, for example, where a large dam out there, they're having to reduce the water because they found a huge crack. It just seems that we're not making the kinds of investments in infrastructure that we should be.
Right, and the city of Detroit's had several underground pipes burst because the frost is going deeper than it's ever gone.
Yeah.
And the people don't deserve this.
No.
They did not create this problem.
No. Well, and it looks like we're going to have another month of it. Hey.
Yeah.
That's going to be exciting.
But I took great glee that Ventura, California was having 20-foot surfing waves, but you probably wouldn't want to go anywhere near them.
Yeah, well, I'm not too sure that, the drought is ending in California, and so it's being replaced by mudslides, which may not be much of an improvement. It's going to be an exciting era. I'm busy reading Elizabeth Colbert's book, The Sixth Extinction.
Oh, yes, I know.
Boy, there's a cheery read.
Yeah, I'm not going to read that anytime soon.
I fall asleep at night with my Kindle reading that, and I think to myself, nightmare's coming as we discover, whatever niche it is we occupy may be the next one to go. So it's going to be an
Yeah,
exciting
that's
future.
not an upbeat book. Talk
No,
about real dystopia.
I added it to the list of for my sustainability class, and one of the students said last time, I can't make it through the book. It's just too depressing. So that's part of the challenge. But there is an author coming in that you wanted to talk about, Keith Whittier. Is
Well,
it?
he's not coming in, but his book is out.
Oh,
Keith Witter
Whittier.
is a Dr. Keith Witter. He's a doctor of American history. He worked on Mackinac Island for almost 30 years, his entire professional career, and he was the director of interpretive programs there. But he's written a book called In the Shadow of Pontiac. And Pontiac refers to, of course, Pontiac, the American Indian.
Not the city.
No, not the city, who led a revolution or an insurrection in the 1760s, almost took back the land for the Indians. But what Keith specifically targeted in his 368 volume book, which is beautifully illustrated with maps and artifacts, it's gorgeous, is one event in American history, Michigan history, that a lot of us have heard or seen reenacted at Fort Michilimackinac, is how I say it, but it's Mackinac, where June 2nd of 1763, the American Indians, the Chippewa Indians, were playing a game outside the fort, and the ball rolled near the fort's gates, and the Indian women had tomahawks and knives hidden under their clothing, and the men got those, and massacred 17 British soldiers. And what a book typically would do would be to focus on that event, which was horrendous massacre.
Mm-hmm.
But what he focuses on is what led up to it and what happened after it. And basically, what happened was diplomacy.
Rather than retaliation.
Rather than retaliation. And that one singular event, for good or bad, changed the outcome of North America. Because the British did not retaliate. The other Indian tribes in the area, through diplomacy, got a number of prisoners freed. The British took over the fort again, and it was a peaceful outcome to a deadly massacre. And he wanted people to understand that it was very complex. It was family relationships because of intermarriage. It was long-standing tribal agreements between the varying, often warring Indian tribes. And it also came down to, back in that era, the quality of the goods that were given.
Well, in an era when it seems leaders are criticized if they use diplomacy, it's nice to know that maybe our history relates to that incident.
Sure does. I think people are surprised because, like I say, the only thing that most people know about it is the reenactments that used to be pretty common at the fort during the summer.
Yeah.
They would reenact that.
Do they still do that?
Not as often.
I see.
Yeah, Indian pageants aren't quite as popular as they used to be. Yeah.
It's not like Civil War reenactments, which seem to be gaining in popularity.
Right. Yeah, there was a certain texture about Indian pageants that aren't as popular as they are anymore.
Yeah, not a good idea.
No.
Yes. Well, we were going to talk about the Oscars from last night, but Bill doesn't watch them.
No. I just read about it in the next day, so I kind of know the movies I want to miss.
And the only thing that I really care about is that my colleague at MSU, Carl Good, took the selfie picture that Ellen did with all the stars, and he really did it with all of these political stars, everything from Hillary and Michelle, replacing all of the other stars, and it looks so good that you'd swear it was the original.
Yeah, he's been doing a series of things that he's posted on Facebook about how easy it is to Photoshop things and sort of create a new reality.
Absolutely. And that's what I was saying. I was hoping this would go viral because I said I want to stay on Carl's good side. I hate to think the things he could Photoshop me into that I would never be able to live down.
He is probably in the top 10, if not the top 2, 3 of the most creative person in Lansing.
Oh, absolutely. And the courses that he teaches for the Media Sandbox at Michigan State are extraordinary. One of the things that he does that I really love, and a lot of people thought that, well, gee, Carl's just sort of having kids play, is he opens his creative process class each semester by throwing out there's 500 kids in the class. I mean, it's one of these huge classes, and he throws out beach balls. And boy, for the first few minutes, God, the kids are having fun and they're batting the beach balls back and forth, and life is wonderful. About 3 minutes in, a few beach balls get batted around. 4 minutes in, beach balls aren't moving anymore. Everybody's bored. And his point is that things that are creative and seem like fun at first, as they become repetition, they lose their newness and they lose their freshness. And so the course is about the creative process. And he talks about the danger of boredom setting in. And I just think those are the kinds of brilliant ways to teach those concepts that only Carl would come up with and do.
Really, it's masterful. I've got a friend whose son runs an incubator up in Petoskey, Harbor Springs area, which seems weird
Yeah,
because he brings people in from all over the country, but
beautiful place
it's
to do it.
actually cheap to stay there compared to
Compared
San
to
Francisco
Palo Alto,
and
yeah.
Palo Alto and
Yeah.
New York. And I sent that to him because I thought it might be a good way to start that next year.
Oh, yeah.
It's really creative.
No, yeah.
You know, the other thing that was interesting in Harbor Springs last year, because a number of the people that come in for these events are Indian. They don't see Indians on the streets of Harbor Springs.
Oh, really?
No, it's white.
Well,
I mean, it's just as pure white.
I'm not
and
sure they
it's-
see very many people from Michigan either. I mean,
Yeah, that's a good point. And
it's mostly the
it was
affluent
really
from
good
Chicago.
for the
isn't it?
community to see different people. They
Yeah.
created, that wasn't one of their outcomes, but it happened.
Huh.
It was
Wow.
kind of unusual last year.
Yes. Well, that's an interesting area up there.
Hmm
I've never seen so much wealth in one.
They have a billionaires club. I
Ouch.
meet in the summer. I mean, it's the only place you could say that in Michigan. I mean, and that doesn't probably include Mike Elich, but billionaires club.
One percenter's home up there in Harbor Springs. On that note, we'll switch gears, I think, and we'll talk about somebody who is at the other end of the spectrum. And it's an interesting story to get into. And we're going to be joined by three people here. We have Andrew Abood, who is an attorney who is working with the Coast Guard, or with the Lato family on the case of that's occurring here in Lansing. And we're also joined by Lynn Martinez and also by Vincent Delgado. And I want to get started by getting a little background from you, if I can, Lynn. Tell us the story of how Coast Guard ended up involved in the criminal justice system.
Well, in June of 2013, there was a murder in the neighborhood near where he lives. And he was identified as the assailant.
How did that happen? How did he surface as a possible predator?
Someone actually identified him as the murderer.
Oh, okay.
And
So he came to the attention of the police.
he came to the attention of the police.
And that's when they brought him in for an interrogation.
An interrogation.
At that time, we know that he is schizophrenic.
At that time, I don't believe he had the diagnosis schizophrenic,
Okay.
but his family had already noticed that he had some emotional issues. And they had started inquiring and started with some treatment for mental health, but they did not go through the whole process at that point, I believe, of having him diagnosed.
Vincent Delgado will join us and maybe contribute to the story. Do we know he's from Sudan,
That's correct.
and
Yep.
his family is from Sudan? Had he gone through some of the trauma in that country?
Yes, yes. Actually, I was the family sponsor when I was the director of refugee services back in the early 2000. And so Koskar's family arrived through Egypt. They had left and fled Sudan, northern Sudan, which is not a traditional way that people leave Sudan. Oftentimes, you hear about people leaving southern Sudan and going to Kenya.
Yeah.
But in their case, they were in northern Sudan and are Christians and ended up in Egypt, where his older brothers were often the targets of police brutality by the Egyptian police there. When Koskar arrived here, he was about 6 or 7. So I didn't know him too well. He was a little boy who was taken along with the family, and I knew his older brothers quite well. And they would tell stories about the whole family being witness to kind of brutal beatings and things like that happened to the family while they were living in Egypt.
Those were such public incidents that were occurring in the country that
Yeah.
people growing up under those circumstances. We have a number of refugees from different countries who have come here. many of whom have been that kind of, been subject to that kind of political oppression
Mhm.
and the kind of witnessing of open violence. And
Correct.
those leave scars on people. There's no doubt that
It does.
it's a traumatizing experience.
Yeah. And when you're that young, your brain is still very much in development. And that may well, I mean, it may well be that the source of his paranoid schizophrenia, which is the current diagnosis that he has, um, could be triggered by early PTSD. You
Yes.
know, he came from a brutal society.
So you have someone who's fragile, and he may not have
Yes.
had a formal assessment at that point. But because of what we know about police tactics, where you can be, they're high pressure tactics designed to try to get a confession. You can be tricked, you can be lied to.
Well, the truth is, Lansing Police Department now tapes every single interrogation. So not only can we assume what went on in the interrogations, we can read it. We can watch it on videotape.
has that
And
been,
I have reviewed the interrogation.
and what did
And
you think?
um, I thought in reading the investigation that he was totally confused and disoriented. I noticed several places in the interrogation where he requested a lawyer that was never provided to him. And I noticed that for someone who comes from the background that I know he does, as Vincent has already pointed out, when the police take you away, if you don't if you don't say and do what they want you to say and do, you never show up again.
Yes.
So this is the background that Kosgar took into this police interrogation where he was afraid. He was deathly afraid because he had seen all this stuff happen in his family and because he thought his job and the only way he would get out of there was to go along with the police. And they read him his rights and he was very confused in understanding his rights.
Even so, he asked for an attorney.
He
but was
asked
not
for an
provided.
attorney. I didn't read the full transcript of the interrogation, but I read about 35 pages of about 55, and I counted about 4 places where he asked for an attorney.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Lynn Martinez and with Vincent Delgado, and we'll be joined soon with Andrew Aboud, the attorney for the Lato family in this situation. And so he confesses at this point to the police.
Yes.
And then he is going to be prosecuted for the murder, but it turns out again that this is a case where we find out that he is not the person. How does that come about?
In fact, Lansing police, after their interrogation and his confession, had so little confidence in that confession that they continued the investigation and found people who were arrested instead. And just over the past week, the shooter actually pled guilty in court.
So we do know that the right person now has been taken off the streets,
As well as you can ever know.
as well as we can ever know. And what the Lato family had every reason to expect was that Kosgar would be returned to his family and that there would be no further consequences to him. But instead, what's happened? Vincent, can you pick up that piece of the story?
Well, before I add to that,
Okay.
I just want to add a couple things. First of all, I want to just clarify that he was not actually identified as the shooter. There was a witness who said that they had seen someone who was black, who had dreadlocks, and spoke with an accent. So for me, as someone that works quite a bit with a lot of refugees, that was concerning that pretty much, because his brothers were also picked up in this, who had said they were going to not talk about anything and ask for an attorney and were released. So my concern in that way was pretty much anyone with dreadlocks who was black, who seemed somewhat foreign, was picked up by the police at this point. So that's a little concerning. At the same time, for me, I know that the police, I can imagine where they were. There had been a shooting in a neighborhood. There was a victim, and there was a victim's family that they needed to do something about. and they had someone who said they did it. So I understand from the police's perspective that it would be difficult for them to just certainly release somebody who said, regardless of the state, because what if by some way it was him? But one would think that a prosecutor would look at that transcript and read the circumstances of what had happened and understand that there really isn't much here to
Right.
this case. Instead, he was in the newspaper. He was put on TV as the alleged murderer by the prosecutor, who went ahead and pressed charges. And as time went,
Prosecutor Stuart Jones
the
III.
third, that's correct. And finally, after some time, uh, the prosecutor was convinced that this was not the murderer, and he dropped charges in the late part of the summer. I think it was in the early fall, late summer, and dropped those murder charges. But in their place, he laid another charge on Mr. Lotto, which was a felony lying to police charge.
That's where I'd like to bring in Attorney Andrew Abood. There are one of the things that I'm interested in as part of this case is that the law under which he was arrested, this idea of lying to police, that's a 4-year-old law here, from what I understand, in the state of Michigan. I thought if you wanted to get free of the police, you did lie to the police. When did we criminalize lying to the police here,
Well,
and why, and how is that law meant?
I'm
What
not-
was it meant to do?
I haven't seen it charged, and I thought it's much more recent than that. I thought it was under the Snyder administration
I
that it
think
was.
it's 2012.
Yeah,
2012?
I thought it was
Okay.
under the Snyder administration, right about the time they did the right to work. They passed the criminal statute about lying to the police.
That snuck in at the same time. Huh?
Well, it was about that time. I'm
Ah.
not really sure, but I mean, it's a statute that the legislature has said. If you lie to the police, that if it's a misdemeanor, about a misdemeanor offense, it's a misdemeanor. If it's about a felony, in this case a homicide, it's a felony. So it's a statute that's new, but I'm not sure who would have told you should lie to the police. I can tell you
I
that
just could think normal
can tell
human
you that-
behavior.
that the best thing to do is to call a lawyer and not make a statement one way or another. And it's an interesting statute that hasn't really had its full and complete. It hasn't been through the appeal process. We haven't really fully litigated under the statute, and it's interesting. When I read the transcript, which is maybe slightly different, I'm not sure that. Although I get how most people would read the transcript, I'm not sure that you could say that he confessed to what most people would refer to as the Pine Street homicide on June 26th. I mean, there was certainly some statements made that you would prefer a person not make to the police under those circumstances, but it's far from being what I would call a confession, and I think rightly so. The investigators, detectives in this case, had serious concerns about the reliability, and I think, as Lynn has pointed out, they really didn't rely on that, or didn't find that his statement was reliable. And it's not unusual that they would continue with an investigation, but I think they were certainly realized that this interview didn't narrow the scope of what they needed to do in the case.
Two cases come to mind for me when I thought about this case. And one was the Central Park jogger case. And we're now seeing the consequences where years later, and I was as persuaded as anybody could be in that era that the 3 young men who were so quickly interrogated by the police ostensibly confessed and then were put away. We now discover that they had nothing to do with the crime. And it's just shocking what a miscarriage of justice that was, and how difficult it's been to rectify and really get them any redress for the years that they spent in prison. We also see the Charles Stewart case in Boston, where Charles Stewart shot his pregnant wife, wounded himself in the process, and then blamed, again, one of those sort of, blame it on the black guy kind of situation, where it led to an absolutely devastating house-to-house search in Boston. And they again came up with a suspect who was fragile and who ostensibly confessed, and then found out, of course, that it was Stewart himself who had committed the crime. I mean, part of the challenge is we see these high-profile cases like this where things go so horribly wrong. But it seems that the high pressure tactics that police use to get confessions really are worrisome.
Well, I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court in Miranda versus Arizona did say that it's part of being in that room that that there's a lot of pressure. Even when and we know this now because of the false confessions. Even when you haven't done anything wrong,
Right.
you can say things that you shouldn't say and not articulate the proper set of facts and admit to things that you didn't do. And we're seeing that all across the country. The interesting thing, Bonnie, is that we see it in high profile cases, but how many millions of cases has it
Right.
happened that we never see it? And I disagree with Lynn slightly. She made a good point that a lot more interviews are videotaped. That's true, and they're recorded in some fashion. But most interviews are not done at the Police Precinct. Most of them
Okay.
are done at the scene, and so we may have the benefit of on-person mic, but often those don't work for whatever reason. So most interviews, although we're doing much better now, are are just a police officer's statement versus a citizen statement. That's the way most police reports read. The more important ones, they're taken to the detective's office and videotape. But
I just saw a case where in Rialto, California, they now are putting video cameras on the officers themselves, and they saw police misconduct complaints go down by 68% in the first year they did that.
and most police cars have in Lansing and around the area, and that's one of the first things we do is we request an in-car video,
Yeah.
and that every police officer who takes a stand testifies. That's not only for protection of the police officer, but protection of the citizen,
Yeah.
and it's a standardized process that they have to make sure that their equipment is working and in proper order before they get in their car.
So now in this case, because of this new law that says that it is illegal to lie to a police officer, even though this man has now not going to be charged with anything related to the homicide, he's now being charged under that, and he has been adjudicated as requiring 15 months of treatment in a mental facility as a result of this.
I'm not sure where you come up with the 15 months.
That's the max.
He was
That's the maximum.
examined for competency
All right.
in December and found not to be competent. And before a criminal proceeding can go forward, you have to be found to be competent. So obviously his family or his lawyer back in December had concerns about his competency. And competency in the legal sense is a very low standard. It essentially means that you understand that you're being charged with a criminal offense, that you understand that you have a lawyer, you sort of understand the penalties, and that you can assist in some degree with preparing your defense and preparing the case. And so, if the experts at Kalamazoo who examined him don't think he's competent, that suggests how serious his mental condition is. And, when you talk about paranoid schizophrenia, which is what he was diagnosed at, that's probably the most serious mental illness that you can have. And you really can't read that transcript. I don't think you have to be a doctor or a psychiatrist to read the transcript. And quite frankly, Koskar said it himself. I don't know how many times he said, "I'm crazy, I'm weird,
And I'm not right.
I'm not right.
I'm not right."
myself.
I mean,
So because he's delusional, when he's talking to the police and therefore makes statements that are delusional, he's now being prosecuted for doing that.
he's being prosecuted for um,
False statements.
saying
Lying to the police.
saying things that they claim that they, being the government, are claiming are false statements.
Could I make one point here, Bonnie?
Many.
The statute that was passed says, and I read it, and I'm a former lawmaker, so I know how to
Yes.
read laws.
Yes.
And it says that in order to charge a person under this statute, they must knowingly and willfully make false statements to the police.
And you can't do that if you're not
And
competent.
if your mental situation is that you are delusional, confused, and later found out to have paranoid schizophrenia, how can you knowingly and willing and willfully lie to police? So that's one of the concerns that we, and I serve as the president of the Lansing branch of the ACLU Michigan. And one of the concerns that we have is the law being used in this case where we have no evidence that those false statements were delivered knowingly and willfully.
Certainly, that's the case. It just seems staggering to me. And yet, at the same time, we've also been told by mental health professionals that the treatment that they are requiring to try to bring him back to competence so he could stand trial is likely to result in his further decompensation, given his mental condition, because he has been doing okay at home, from what I understand. And people are worried that when he leaves his family, this is going to cause further trouble for him. Is that right?
I think Vincent's the right one to speak to that.
That's a tough question. We know that for some people, um, being institutionalized, people that suffer from paranoid schizophrenia, being institutionalized can be helpful. We know that depending on the circumstances of the illness, sometimes it's helpful because you can stabilize medication. They're in an environment where they might be more comfortable. In the case of now, this is from my conversation with mental health professionals, both at community mental health and otherwise. What they suggest is that preparation for competency is different than mental health treatment.
see.
So those are two different things.
They're just trying to get him to the point where he can
Well,
testify.
Well, that's the goal of competency treatment,
Yeah.
is for competency to stand trial. Now, the question is whether that treatment is detrimental. I'm not sure that we can prove that one way or the other. The question is more, will it be helpful, as helpful as it is where he is now with his family, with working with community mental health professionals. We know that community mental health professionals have told the family that they're willing to do everything they can to ensure that he's continued to receive treatment and stabilization. And so the family feels that he would be more stable at home. Now, there are people that have experienced and have family members with paranoid schizophrenia who have found that it actually is more helpful for them to be institutionalized. That's not clear, but that's not the question at this moment. The question at this time is that we have a prosecutor who, in the guise of saying he's interested in the young man's mental health, is actually preparing competency for trial. That's what this is about at
Yes.
this point.
I'd like to ask you, Andrew, just a couple questions based on my observation. What's his status right now? And then secondly, did the prosecutor have to do this? I mean, were his hands tied where he was forced to go to a competency evaluation? Could he just have dismissed the charges, apologized to the gentleman, and say, thank you, we're sorry?
And before that, I need to say that this is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing.
I don't think they apologize. I can tell you we've sarcastically asked for apologies often, we never get them. So the prosecutor has the unfettered discretion regarding charges. And when the prosecutor issues a felony like they did in this case, the sort of reviewing authority there's a sort of check and balance on the prosecutor's exercise of that discretion is the district court in what's called a preliminary examination. And in that case, that is Judge DeLuca, whose the case is currently in front of, but unfortunately it really hasn't gotten to that point because of his competency status. So there's absolutely no question that the prosecutor has the discretion to dismiss the charges. And what's interesting is that I'm going sort of off a press release that I read sort of a week ago. It suggests that there is a standard in their office that before they can dismiss the charge, they need to make sure that he is mentally, I guess, fit to protect the society. Now, number one, certainly everybody knows that he's out on bond, so he's in society right now. And number two, I'm not aware of the standard applying to really any other case. Now, um, there are few cases where somebody is not found to be mentally competent, but there are some. But certainly under the circumstances, there was a decision made in July to, I believe it was July 27th, when they decided to change the charge from homicide to lying to the police. And that was a decision that clearly came within their discretion. And then to continue with the charge, is clearly within their discretion. And it seems to me that we have somebody here who is a victim of circumstance, and we should treat him as a victim and not as a defendant.
This reminds me, and I'm sure everyone here will know it, maybe not our listening audience, but one flew east, one flew west, one flew over the cuckoo's nest.
Yeah.
This is insanity, but it has nothing to do with the victim. I am just something's terribly wrong.
We've seen the Lansing State Journal come out with a very strong editorial talking about the fact that this is not prosecution, this is persecution. That you dare not embarrass the prosecutor, or these kinds of things tend to happen to you. Again, and it's only a minor incident, but I had a run-in with the prosecutor years ago over a conference where he made sure that I was not allowed to participate, even though I was the head of the Michigan Victim Alliance and the coordinator of the Victims in the Media program at Michigan State. And it was never quite clear what it was I had done to offend him so that he wouldn't allow me to participate. But he does have a reputation for being unhappy with people who do not do things his way. And I mean, I want to be transparent and say, so people might perceive me as having ill will towards him as a result of that. But the reality is that we've seen with this prosecutor a few years ago, a similar circumstance happen where the office was profoundly embarrassed in another homicide case where the police and the prosecutors ended up charging the wrong person, which in that case led to additional homicides occurring. And then it's a very murky case. It's the the Macon and McCullum case. And it seems like this is a very bad rerun of that same movie. And it seems that lessons that should have been learned then aren't being learned now.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure you're sort of throwing this out to the floor. I mean, you've asked a number of different questions.
You're the attorney, so you may not want to get into all
no,
of that.
I'm happy to. First of all,
Yeah.
I respect somebody who has the courage of their convictions, and I think in many ways Stuart Dennings does, and he has a way he does things, and um, and you don't always agree with him. I have disagreed with him, but I respect the fact that he believes in what he's doing. I think that's important. That too many prosecutors and too many lawyers do things that they don't believe in. Now, the question is it right or wrong? You can believe in what you're doing. In this case, they apparently have decided to institute a policy that we have to make sure he's competent. And then on top of that, we have to have an opinion on criminal responsibility, which is going to cost my clients some money, in order to dismiss the case. I disagree with that. I disagree with it in this case. I think it's inappropriate. But, they have good lawyers over there. I think the one thing that they did do in fairly short fashion, 30 days is a long time to be in jail for an innocent man, especially with a homicide charge hanging over your head. But, we don't measure legal cases in hours and minutes. They're measured in months and years. And so for them to make a decision at least 30 days down the road that they made a mistake, they did that. And I don't know whether we can, fault the McCallum case or credit the McCallum case for making the decision here. There may be some additional analogies between the two, but the prosecutor makes decisions every day to charge people, and a lot of them I disagree with, and they would say, of course you disagree with every one, and I understand that. I think this case, that two wrongs don't make a right here, and I think the real problem is that their policy here should not be applied on this case. This isn't the case to make a policy. like they're doing.
I'd like to hear from Lynn and Vincent about their reaction to where things stand now, why it is that this case is still going forward. It seems that it's been such an embarrassment. I can't understand what benefit you think this might be to the community. Why is it that, what's going on here? Why is this happening? You have any idea?
Um, One of the things that I've learned in my life is that I never presume for someone else what motivates them. And I have only heard minor things about what people think and read in the newspaper what everybody else has read about why the prosecutor's doing this. And his original statements were that it's a criminal act to lie to the police in a felony situation, and he had a law, and he was going to charge this young man. And then all of this other circumstance started showing up about his mental health issues and stuff, and he became more a sympathetic person in the community. You know, people started thinking more about he came from Sudan and he has mental illness. And there have been any number of requests to the prosecutor to drop these charges from various groups and individuals. Um, and we're still waiting to see if he will do that.
We're seeing the deformation of our laws with things like Stand Your Ground, which Michigan also passed, similar to what went on in Florida. And we're seeing a lot of this, what I would call ALEC-generated legislation coming out of right-wing think tanks, where boilerplate that different states are adopting, things like now lying to the police can get you a felony charge in a case like this, where we're seeing stand your ground laws. It just seems to me that we are seeing the law distorted in a way that I've never seen before. It just seems to me that one of the things that I've always liked about the law is that it was supposed to be the bright, white light of the law, but also tempered with mercy. And it seems that we've decided that mercy is no longer part of the equation. It's all punitive. It's all the idea of putting people away. And it seems that that's kind of gone crazy in this case. You have someone who really wasn't lying. He may have made delusional statements, but that's not the same as a lie, as you were talking about. And yet he's facing this situation where, I mean, it's one of these nightmarish cases that you think never should have happened. But we're watching them more and more, aren't we? These kinds of strange deformations of the law. Shouldn't this be just a case where he goes home and his family is given help to get him the help he needs?
Yeah, I think that as Mr. Buddha suggested, he should be treated as a victim here. And certainly, with my experience working in the community, working with social workers, and many of the things that I've done with refugees, we found that people do better if you work with them. And this particular situation, I've had trouble understanding. I can tell you that about a month ago, I was very hopeful because there had been what appeared to be an agreement where Koskar would be able to stay home. And I was in the hearing. I heard the agreement discussed. Where Koskar, if he stayed with community mental health, stayed with his family, with regular updates from community mental health, that he would be allowed to stay and that eventually the charges would be dropped. The community mental health would have to issue some kind of reports to the court via the family, who would have that responsibility. After that hearing, I called Mr. Dines and thanked him for considering an alternative and told him that I thought it was very thoughtful of him to see if we could find an alternative in this case. His response was somewhat gruff, but what he did say was, I'm just trying to do what's right for this young man. And he further said that this was the first time he had ever heard that the young man had any mental health difficulty, that his office had never seen any reports. Well, I was very positive. I was very thoughtful. I thought we have someone in our community that's thinking for the young man, that's thinking about this. And then started talking to some folks and found out actually Mr. Dunnings had those reports and knew he was mentally ill, at least his office did, for over a month. And then I got a call about a week later essentially suggesting that the prosecutor had changed his mind, that he wanted it to be about competency, and that if the family did not provide either a trained expert in competency, that they would pursue the time in Kalamazoo. I don't understand this. Just plain and simple, I don't understand this. I've worked with Mr. Dunnings in kind of in a separated way as the former co-chair of the Power of We Consortium, and he's on a thing called the Ingham Change Initiative that is supposed to look at policies, including his own, out of consideration for some justice issues with black young
Yeah,
men.
yeah.
And so we've been very hopeful that the prosecutor's office, as well as other institutions, would be as thoughtful as I felt he was being a month ago. What's happening now, I don't understand. And most people that I talk to say the same thing. We can't presume to know what he's thinking, but we can certainly believe and know that we don't understand it.
Andrew, what is going to happen? I mean, walk us through what's the likely scenario here.
I think the case is going to get dismissed.
Once it gets to the judge,
Well, I mean,
or even before?
I think the case is a dead man walking. This case doesn't have legs. Nobody can read that transcript. I don't think there's a jury in the world that'll convict him. Um, I mean, he's suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. That's not like the flu. You know, you don't just wake up one morning because you drank out of a cup of water or you were exposed to something. Paranoid schizophrenia is a serious problem that has a number of different factors that doesn't just show up out of the blue. And if he has it in December, he definitely had it in June. And there's nobody in this community that's going to convict him. But the question is, how long does it take to get there, and how much money do we have to spend? And you know, it's kind of like chemotherapy. You know, chemotherapy may save you, but it's going to take years off your life.
Right.
And why should this family have to go through that? How much stress, and how long do they have to show up in court? And how many nights do they have to go to bed worrying about it? And how many lawyers do they have to hire? And how many TV shows or letters to the editor or phone calls do we have to make before you do the right thing? And you know, I learned a long time ago, there's never a bad time to do the right thing. There's never a bad time. So, you know, that's the thing, and that's sort of why I got involved. I met with Vince and the family about a month ago, and I think it was about that time when I made a couple of phone calls and I said, this case is going to go away. And then a month later, I they're still
Much to
waking
your surprise.
they're still waking up every day, you know, with their brother, and they have this sort of dilemma. They have this dual problem of not only is he suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, but you know, they have a criminal case they have to defend against, and you know, a felony or a misdemeanor or any type of criminal case is a serious thing that people worry about
Oh, terrible.
every single
The
day.
pressure
It's
is enormous.
very stressful, and it's very stressful on this family. And you know, from what I can tell, these are good and hard and decent work, decent people who are good for Lansing, who are doing good things, and you know, I think that in the end of the day, that's what's going to happen to the case. It's just a matter of when.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7, here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with attorney Andrew Abood, also with Lynn Martinez and Vincent Delgado, about the Cascarledo case and how he is still facing felony charges that I think we all agree. It seems everybody in the community, except somehow for the prosecutor, agrees should be dropped. And the question is, the longer it goes on, the more onerous it becomes in many ways. You know, I guess if you were talking about the issue of competence, you ought to know in your office whether there have been papers filed a month earlier about somebody's mental condition. We saw in the case the last time where there was somebody who was erroneously charged with homicide, that later one of the attorneys in the office was fired. And you had to question whether really the prosecutor, the chief prosecutor, the prosecuting attorney for the county should know what's going on in his own office. If there's that kind of problem with a homicide case, which ought to be the case receiving the greatest scrutiny, again, you can only imagine what's happening with some of the lesser cases where people are being treated this way. It's worrisome. I mean, this is an office that's already under close scrutiny, apparently on the part of the Office of Civil Rights from the Department of Education for failure to charge in the case of athletes from MSU. So it's not that we have a prosecuting attorney who's notorious for always charging. I mean, he was willing to take the heat and not charge in that case. So it seems to me that just because we have a new law doesn't mean you have to charge somebody under it.
Well, I mean, that's true. It's an exercise of discretion, you know, and they do that every day. And I think in this case, you know, of the thousands that they handle, and I'm not suggesting that they're making mistakes on all the other ones. I think on this case, uh, you know, the time has come to dismiss the charge.
Well, again, if you're making mistakes on the ones where we're watching,
You know,
it raises questions about the ones where we're not.
They do have a lot of very, very good prosecutors in that office. And I'll tell you, the one that's handling the case, Mike Cheltenham, is probably one of the best prosecutors I've ever gone against by far. But even the best lawyer makes mistakes. That's why we call it the practice of law. It's not a perfect system, and
Mhm.
it happens to be very imperfect when you have somebody who's mentally ill and innocent and not of great financial means. And that's unfortunately that's what Koskar is sort of in the situation he has, all three. And
even the family members, I think, had a really good point when they said he didn't step forward, he didn't call, he was picked out. I mean, that's a totally different issue.
Right, it's not that he came forward
No,
and wasted police
he
time
was
by
grabbed
a
off the
false
street.
confession, right. They were trying to get information from him, so it just strikes me that, I mean, I could see a circumstance potentially where
a little
somebody
bit
is a
more.
nuisance, yeah.
And I think the Lansing State Journal too. This is one of the few times they really went out on something like this.
They did an
That was amazing.
incredible investigative report on this. Kevin Grasha has really followed this and really has been one of the major informants of the whole community.
I would urge
about
people too to
what's
look at the
going on.
letters to the editor. There's one today from Kirk Heinze that is stunning in its concern about what's happening in this case. I mean, it's blackening the reputation of the prosecuting attorney's office, I think.
And that reflects on all of us
Yeah.
because it's an elected office.
Yeah. But it's 2.5
Andrew-
more years before it's elected again, so.
Andrew began to address this question of what does it cost the community that this process keeps going on. And I did a little fact check and found out that to keep Coscarlato in the Muskegon facility where he is waiting to be sent costs $833 a day.
Mm.
That's $26,000 a month for up to 15 months. Now, the 15-month limit, that's the max because he's charged with a 4-year felony and he can't be required to stay in treatment to achieve competency for more than 1/3 of that potential 4-year felony.
I see, so that's how it's
So
calculated?
that's how those things are calculated. But $26,000 a month. And what good is that doing any of us?
And might I ask also, because one of the things that disturbed me about changes in the law over the years is that now some of those bills end up going to the family as well. I don't know about in this case, but I do know people who do time in jail face costs when they come out.
Well, let me just talk a little bit more about the cost of the family. And one thing I want to urge people to go to find out more about this case is to go to justiceforcoscar.org.
And that's KOS.
KOSGAR, yeah, justiceforcoscar.org. And there you'll find the actual transcript. You'll also find an opportunity to sign a petition, and you'll also find an opportunity to contribute to his legal defense fund that's been set up. The impact on this family, I just want to mention something about this family. I've known this family for years, and this is one of the good families in our town. 5 of those kids that came, this was a big family, are in or have completed graduate school.
Wow.
These aren't, this is a good family. And one of the brothers wrote an email to me that and sustained me through this battle, and I think he's sustaining the family. And I just wanted to read just a part of what this is what the family is saying.
Yes.
What they wanted to be said is, my brother is a quiet young boy who has a passionate love of soccer. He has lived a simple, quiet, family-oriented life. He never hurt anyone, nor tried to take advantage of others. He suffers from a diagnosed mental condition. He is of no threat to society or to himself, yet the prosecutor wishes to incarcerate him with dangerous mentally ill criminals for more than a year for the purpose of, quote, helping him, so he can answer why he supposedly confessed, and then later recanted to a crime he didn't commit. All of this for the purpose of placing him on trial to answer for the charges they created. I want to say to the prosecutor that many people make mistakes. It is okay. Hebrews 4:13 says, "Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account." He goes on to write, "Confess your mistake and let my brother live in peace with his family. Remember that, quote, pride comes before destruction and an arrogant spirit before a fall." Proverbs 16:18.
It's
This is
beautiful.
a religious family. This is a family that is good for our town. They don't need to be going through this.
I would add that none of the defense fund will be coming to you often. We've agreed to do it without charge, but there will be expenses for experts as needed. So
I mean, it's inevitable that there are going to be the out-of-pocket costs if it goes to trial.
well, we'll have. I mean, we need to hire an expert to have them examined. We've interviewed two, and hopefully that can be done in the next 30 days.
This is just such a tragedy. Lynn, when you were in elected office, um, the system is imperfect. I mean, it can't be perfect. But that's the reason that we have people coming forward in the community trying to put pressure. It doesn't seem to me that you could withstand this pressure for very long. We don't have to wait 2.5 years for another election. We need something done now. What can people in the community do? Write letters,
Um, I
sign the
think
petition?
Vincent has advised people to do the most effective thing. If you listened to this program and you aren't already familiar with the case, go to the website www.justiceforcoastguard.org, read the transcript, sign the petition, and help us fund the assessment and the things and the motions and the legal actions that are going to provide justice for a person who in this case is clearly a victim and not a criminal.
We see the case right now in Florida where the prosecutor, after the woman was finally released, she's the one who shot in the air when her husband was coming after her. And many people felt that that was, she was convicted under the stand your ground law. She was not allowed, that defense did not protect her. And now the prosecutor has decided that she will retry the case and she will ask for 3 consecutive 20-year sentences, 60 years. So she's now upping the ante. And it's as if you embarrass the prosecutor, then they get punitive. And because she was embarrassed by having to release this woman and it was so much pressure in the community, that's a very dangerous power for prosecutors to have. I mean, really need to be careful. There need to be checks and balances. So it's really the district court that has the ultimate say here. Could they step in now?
They have an initial say. Um, um, they have an initial say at the preliminary exam, which is the magistrate, part of the examining magistrate or district court's job is to review what the prosecutor has done and to make a determination that this citizen, this defendant, should have to defend against a felony. And the standard is very low. But, the judge is involved and has made a determination on competency, but they really can't go any farther when you have a defendant who is incompetent because the defendant has a right to participate in their own case. And we can't just go on, you know, in the case, although in this case it may result in the case being dismissed, we can't really go on until Koskar really understands and can participate in his own defense.
So the judge does not have the discretion to say that because he cannot participate in his case, and that is this sort of convoluted reasoning that allows him to be charged in the first place, that I'm just going to dismiss it? We couldn't just dismiss it at this point?
Well, for instance, if we filed a motion to dismiss the case, based upon legal arguments, one of which is that he requested a lawyer they didn't give him one.
Right.
We could ask that the statement he made be suppressed. We couldn't have a hearing on the motion because Kaskar
Is not
has a
competent.
constitutional right to be there and participate. And if he's not competent, he's not really able to participate.
I would
So,
ask everybody to reread Catch 22 because it certainly sounds like this is an opening chapter of Mr. Heller's famous book about how, you can't be adjudged as incompetent and insane because if you come to the court telling them that you're insane, it must mean that you're sane. I mean, if we seem to be involved in the same sort of circular reasoning here.
it could be seen that way.
Yeah.
We have a possible remedy for this, and
What's
that
that?
is that Judge Thomas Boyd has been pushing to start a mental health court.
Oh,
And
yes.
this seems like the type of court case that certainly should be in the mental health court. Of course, it's often up to the prosecutor's discretion whether to utilize that as a venue.
Oh, that's a wonderful. Now we're running out of time, and I thank Vincent Delgado, Lynn Martinez, and Andrew Aboud for joining us this evening. But maybe that's a wonderful additional program that we ought to do. The success of some of the drug courts has been remarkable. The idea of having a mental health court in the community, certainly this kind of case highlights the importance of making sure. Unfortunately, the criminal justice system has been become our mental health institution of last resort. Thank you very much. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing. Make sure to tune in next Monday night. We'll keep you updated on this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Bonnie.
We're really off.
Yes, 1 second because I have to hit this button.